This is Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, a podcast from the Foster School of Business MBA Career Management Office. I'm your host, Gregory Heller. On each episode, I talk with guests from faculty and staff to students, alumni, and business leaders about the skills and strategies that can help you design a professional career that you're happy with. On this episode, recorded in March of 2022, I spoke with two Foster MBA students about their experience attending ClimateCap, the global MBA summit on climate, capital, and business in February of that year. ClimateCap, as you'll hear, brings together MBA students from around the world with corporate leaders in sustainability to discuss the 21st century's biggest business issue. Now, in the past year, we've seen the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, two pieces of legislation that will pump billions of dollars into renewable energy, decarbonization, and other solutions to the climate crisis. In the last few months, as headlines have covered layoffs in big tech, other headlines have told a different story of hiring by companies focused on climate tech and sustainability. The Foster School has also rolled out an ESG concentration within the MBA program. Interest in climate jobs is hot, inside and outside of business schools. Connor Almon-Griffin from the class of 2023 and Doug Beach from the class of 2022 talk about their experience at the conference and, more broadly, how they crafted their time in the MBA program to set them up for careers in sustainability. Connor, Doug, welcome to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life.
Thanks for having us, Gregory. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Doug, as the second-year student on the call here, could you tell us just a little bit about what you were doing before you came to Foster, what you did for the summer, and where you're headed for full-time?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me. So before Foster, I actually worked in the chemical industry. I graduated undergrad with a degree in chemical engineering and basically spent 6.5 years doing chemical manufacturing. So I lived in the Gulf Coast and also in North Carolina and had a pretty, I would say, representative engineering experience. I worked in a plant on the Mississippi River in the Gulf Coast. It's everything that you think it might be. So think pipes, hard hats, steel-toed boots, all of that. And then I came to Foster to kind of switch careers. I've always been intrigued by living in Seattle. It turns out it's amazing. I love living here. And so part of my goal in coming to Foster was not only career switch, but also find employment here in Seattle. And so this summer I interned with West Monroe Partners, which is a consulting firm based in Chicago, but I worked in the Seattle office here downtown. And then this fall I re-recruited and I will be going to Accenture Strategy in a consulting role full-time starting in September, also in the Seattle office. So all in all, very pleased with how things turned out and glad I chose Foster.
And Connor, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction about where you're coming from and where you hope to be headed?
Yeah, absolutely. I come from the apparel manufacturing industry where I was working on capacity analytics and long-term corporate strategy. And I came to Foster, I came to get my MBA specifically to pivot into a career that was related to sustainability. And I chose Foster because of one, the location. I'm a long-term Seattleite, and I have no interest in leaving this beautiful area, as well as there's such a ripe business culture here that is focused on sustainability. And so I thought this would be a really good area to get my education in a way that would set me up to pivot into a sustainability career path without having any prior professional experience in that area. And so far, that has been a very good choice. I'm still landing between a couple options for my summer internship, but they're all looking to be sustainability focused. So really excited for what's going to come in the next summer and then the next year as well.
Thanks for those introductions. You both attended the ClimateCap conference earlier this year. Let's tell folks what that conference is.
Yeah, I can take that. ClimateCap is kind of like a big global summit for MBAs, and business leaders to come together, both to help educate MBA students about what they need to know as future business leaders in terms of sustainability, as well as bringing like-minded students and businesses together to figure out how we can work together to work towards changing the direction of global climate change.
It's happened a couple times, right? And this year it was in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of people were there other than, the MBA students like yourselves? How big is it? Where are people coming in from
Sure.
outside of the MBA population, or the kind of titles and companies that were represented?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. I have some notes here from myself and also other attendees. So as you mentioned, I think there was probably about 250, 300 people total. They're mostly students, but the students were brought in to see the battery of speakers and panelists that they had. So they had some sponsoring companies like Persephone, which is a climate tech SaaS company. So their CEO, I believe, spoke to us at the opening remarks. There was also people from GM, from EY, from Albertsons. And basically all of these people were execs at these companies, and part of the goal that I think Northwestern did a really good job of is to show sort of the multifaceted nature of the climate crisis, right? So when students are thinking about where they want to land, the answer is you can really go anywhere and still have a career in sustainability. And I think they did a really good job of showcasing all the different industries, from finance to food to energy and the grid to car manufacturing, hard manufacturing, and even human capital were all represented there. And I think it made for a really complete picture of the challenge before us.
I imagine there are some really good networking opportunities at a conference like ClimateCap.
Yeah, I think especially
Absolutely.
Yeah, for people who haven't, identified a full-time role or still in the pool, it was definitely a really exciting time for them. And then even for myself specifically, I mean, there were Accenture managing directors that chaired some of the panels, and it never hurts to give those people your name and let them know you're there in case I run into them in the future. So absolutely.
And how about you, Connor? What are some networking highlights?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a huge networking opportunity. And I think what was most beneficial and to be completely honest, inspiring to me was just to be surrounded by a bunch of other like-minded MBAs from a wide variety of schools. So you had Foster and some people from Stanford representing the West Coast, but then you had a lot of attendees from kind of the traditional East Coast schools, Harvard, Wharton, and to be able to brush elbows with those people who are similarly focused on trying to have an impact through business was just a really energizing event.
So you're at the event, you're meeting people, you're going to these panels, you're learning about what companies are doing, what roles are involved in sustainability at those companies, you're making connections with other MBAs. Conference ends, you come back to Foster. What is the impact there? Are you still in touch with folks? Is there an online community, email lists? Are you collaborating or coordinating with any people you met at those sessions or at the conference?
So I think for me, one of the things that I thought about leaving the conference is, this is sort of all for naught if I don't, do something with it. And so on that end, outside of connecting with people on LinkedIn in person, the last night of the conference, I've messaged some of the speakers to varying degrees of effect, frankly, but to be expected, and reached out to them. And honestly, following up with people in a networking context when I don't have an ask that is an internship or a job takes a lot of the pressure off of me, and I find it to be a lot easier. And then also, I think here in the Foster community specifically, I think there's a lot of energy.
So yeah, coming back, tell me what happened when you came back from the conference and what you brought back to Foster.
Yeah, so bringing back to Foster, I think especially around the net impact leadership, I guess the second years, which I can speak to more accurately because I interact with them regularly, there was a lot of energy for the future of the Foster community when it comes to sustainability. We started whispering questions of, could we host an event like this? What would that look like? What would that take? Who do we need to engage? And I think quietly that gains momentum, right? So we're in contact with now the new club leadership, the first years, soon to be second years. And it's my hope that they have that sort of same level of energy in both wanting to do something like that, who they can interact with locally in the Seattle community, because frankly, there's a laundry list of sustainability opportunities right here in our own backyard. And then also, what can we be doing in our careers? So that's more focused on the second years. But, I'm going to a big consulting firm where the onus is really on me to make my career at Accenture about sustainability. And I think this was a nice, gentle reminder of the places where I can find that type of work, even within a firm that size that isn't in name a sustainability consulting firm.
So you mentioned net impact, and I've had some other folks who've been involved with net impact on the podcast. But for listeners, Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit about net impact for the listeners who haven't heard about it before?
Yeah, of course. So Net Impact is a national organization that has chapters at the professional, graduate, and undergraduate level. So typically when we're speaking about net impact within the context of this podcast, we're talking about the Foster specific chapter. But what Net Impact does is it brings people together and provides resources, sounding boards, networking, and connections for people who are looking to have an impact through the business world, whether that's social impact, environmental impact, general welfare. It's an organization focused on creating opportunities for people to do that within the business setting.
Net Impact has some great events coming up. Obviously, those are going to happen before this podcast comes out. But for students or incoming students who are hearing this, Net Impact is really the club to get involved with if you want to pursue a career in sustainability or you have a keen interest in sustainability, because that's where events of that sort really live at Foster. For students who might be thinking about going to ClimateCap in the future, what are some tips that you would have to maximize the experience? You want to start, Doug?
In terms of maximizing experience, do your research. So the folks at Kellogg were really great in pushing the conference app ahead of time. So we had a really good idea of the schedule, of the speakers, of the panels, and who was going to be where when. And then it was really on us, and I think it did make a huge difference for me personally, researching the speakers ahead of time. Not just looking at what company they work for now, but also what they do there, what they've done in the past, who they might have worked for before. Because we talked about networking earlier. This is a great opportunity to LinkedIn study all of these people. And I think it helped me come prepared with questions, with who I wanted to see, so I could really make the most of my time at the conference. So I wasn't scrambling, thinking about where I wanted to go and who I wanted to talk to.
I want to highlight really investing that time ahead of a conference to do that research, to know who you want to connect with, so that you can maximize the time that you're there. Critically important thing to do, because you don't want to spend all the money and effort to go someplace and then be scrambling to figure out, why am I here? So figuring that out in advance with LinkedIn stalking or conference app stalking and getting your game plan together. How about you, Connor? Do you have any other advice that you would add?
Yeah, I guess I could tackle advice I have for once you're there, and that is talk to as many people as you possibly can, whether that's the students or the speakers after breakout sessions. I think the wonderful thing about the speakers that come to a conference like this is that 98% of the time they're there because this is something that they're passionate about and they want to talk to people about. And so they're very receptive to people coming up, introducing themselves, asking additional questions after breakout sessions or after keynote addresses even. Find them during the networking happy hours or lunch, and then just talk to as many fellow students as you can. I think this is one of the unique opportunities to network with people specifically within this space. And what I found myself doing was having conversations with amazing people who were applying sustainability in ways that I'd never even thought of before. And it was kind of eye-opening, energizing, I think is a word I used earlier, and just a true benefit of going to a conference like this is getting the diversity of ideas and opinions within the space.
Let's take a step back from the ClimateCap conference. Obviously, you both have an interest in sustainability, right? You went to this conference. What are some of the other ways that you've nurtured that interest beyond your involvement in net impact and attending the ClimateCap conference? Are there publications that you read or podcasts you listen to or books that you would recommend to a student with these same interests?
Hold on, I'm looking up.
Do you want to start us off, Connor, this time?
Well, while Doug's looking up his list, there's a number of things out there. The At Scale podcast is a really good resource. I'm also a big fan of following companies and professional influencers on LinkedIn who are in this space. I'm sure Katie Cross's name has come up a million times on your podcast, but first thing to do is follow her on LinkedIn. She's always posting awesome job opportunities in this space, but also articles. So I use LinkedIn and the people and companies that I follow as an article aggregator because people are constantly posting about exciting news or ideas in this space on LinkedIn. And so I think that's honestly probably my primary resource these days.
How about you, Doug?
Yeah, so I had a chance there to open my Spotify and kind of see where I've been in the podcast realm there. I guess I'll start this with it's not a caveat, but sort of a filter is that I'm interested in sort of the energy space and also specifically the semiconductor role of that. So the Solar Power podcast is one that I've listened to frequently. Clean Tech Talk with Alf Poor is also pretty good. And then also Recharge, which is more specifically about batteries, which is, again, just sort of my area of interest in the space. And frankly, I used to not really be a podcast person, but I've found that it, no offense, I'm on a podcast right now, but
I was going to say, now you are a podcast person.
But it's a great way to take in information while I'm doing, so-called mindless tasks at home, like doing the dishes or stuff that uses my body's occupied, but my brain isn't necessarily. And so these have been ones that I've found sort of on my own, following my own interest to just kind of stay up to date. Because one of the things that I'm specifically trying to combat here is when I start work in the fall is, I'm going to be new to all of these spaces that I claim I want to be working in. And so at least being up to date and level set with what's happening in the industry is really the least I can do. And so these are some of the ways that I've gone about trying to do that.
Well, and I think what you highlight there is that whatever your interest is in sustainability, you can probably find 5 podcasts that are on that niche alone. If it's solar, battery power, and semiconductors, that's going to fill up. You'll have content for not only the dishes, but the laundry and cleaning up the house, right?
Yeah.
And if your interest is on circular economy or supply chain sustainability, I'm sure there are podcasts on that. The At Scale podcast, which I think is from Morgan Stanley.
It is.
They've done a lot. It's like recycling at scale, I think was this season, if I remember correctly. So there are just tremendous resources out there in the podcast sphere to go deep on specific issues of sustainability. That's a great place to increase your awareness and education and expertise, or begin that expertise. And then it's the same thing with blogs, news sources, and you can find a lot of very specific ones related to whatever your issue of sustainability is. Connor.
Yeah, I've got just one thing to add here. And I think as, you're hearing all these names of podcasts and resources come at you, if you're anything like me coming from a lack of experience in sustainability work, take the time up front to kind of figure out what you're interested in and then figure out what you don't know. And then use that to start chasing podcasts, because as Gregory mentioned, there's tons of podcasts, there's tons of journals, there's tons of documentaries out there for any specific aspect of sustainability. And if you can identify what you need to learn, it can narrow that list down really quick and it can be less overwhelming, which is something I ran into getting into this space. I was like, oh my gosh, there's hundreds of podcasts alone on sustainability topics. Where do I even begin?
Yeah. So how did you, as a first year student, you're coming up on the tail end of the first year, in your first quarter or two, how did you really start to narrow your focus?
That's a good question. So I came into the program thinking that I really wanted to do sustainability strategy at the corporate level. But one thing I found as I was getting into my studies, I took the Intro to Finance class, which I've never had any background in. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is really interesting to me, finance in general. How would I apply that to a sustainability role, whether that's green investing, ESG reporting for hedge funds, any number of different things. And then think about, what do I need to learn in that area to at least be competent in an interview, with the expectation that, everybody in an MBA program, a high number of them are pivoting careers, so they're not going to be experts. But how do I be competent in this area, specifically with a sustainability lean to it?
And Doug, did you what was your path to the particular interest in power and semiconductors?
Yeah, so I think before Foster, I mentioned I was a chemical engineer, and I sort of saw all the things that don't look so good, and whether or not we were doing our best to mitigate those things. I've always kind of wanted my MBA to be a pivot point in my career in a more sustainable direction. That being said, I definitely align more with the sort of engineering type roles, functions, careers, in a sense that I feel like I'm making a difference when I'm creating something for others, right? So before it was chemicals, because frankly, like it or not, the world that we live in relies on them. But what can I be doing in a sustainability space that's going to achieve the same thing for society? And I think, the power question is a really pressing issue for us. And how can we make renewable energy not only affordable, but also, make it the option of choice, not only for consumers, but for power companies, right? Why aren't they, why are we still investing in even natural gas, right? It's a nice stopgap, but what's holding wind and solar back? What are those questions? Where can I fit into that equation using what I knew before Foster? And I think that sort of touches on a really important point. And one of my big takeaways from ClimateCap is that you can get involved wherever your background or your interest lies. The problem is that big, which can be daunting, but is also a wealth of opportunity. Like literally follow your passion in a sustainability direction and you will find something that A, you're good at, and B, you're passionate about. And those are the two really important things. So for me, the energy portion of this equation is kind of just where I landed.
If I could piggyback off of that, that was another exciting thing that I got out of ClimateCap and really brought back with me was there's an increasing trend with business leaders, at least the ones they were presenting. And, these were big names, Chevron, Shell, GM. They're starting to think of sustainability as more of a holistic approach rather than having a standalone sustainability department that is independent from any other functions. These leaders were talking about, I need a financial analyst who knows about finance and can apply that. I need an operations manager who knows sustainable supply chain practices. And so as Doug was saying, it's becoming quickly apparent that you can have an impact on sustainability, even if you're not a sustainability program manager, even if you're not the VP of corporate sustainability. You can apply those principles to any role. And as I mentioned, that's something I brought back to Foster in terms of trying to bend the program office and the dean's ear to say, hey, even in our core classes, we need to have some aspect of this in the instructional material because it's what business leaders are looking for when hiring newly graduated MBAs.
Yeah. So I think I used to say when I was really got involved in tech in the early aughts, we used to say every company is becoming a tech company, right? So by the 2010s, it's like every company is a tech company. Starbucks is a tech company, right? And now it's every company is a sustainability company. I know I've actually said it before on this podcast, but more and more we're hearing this, that in every company, there are people who are trying to figure out how to deliver that product or that service in a more sustainable way, how to lighten that company's footprint in terms of carbon or energy or water. So there really are tremendous amount of opportunities. And when you talk about the connection, or like bringing it back to how does it influence what happens within the walls of the Foster School, there's a conversation that's happening not just at Foster, but at business schools around the world that has to do with what business schools need to do to address the climate crisis. There was a fantastic article. I'll put a link in the show notes, along with links to everything else that we've mentioned in Harvard Business Review, that basically was titled, like, I think, what responsibility do business schools have to address the climate crisis, or business schools can do more to address the climate crisis. I was on a webinar with one of the authors of that article, and I just got another newsletter that mentioned it. So this is a conversation that's happening, and it's great to hear that there were so many people at the ClimateCap conference, which I'm sure is in part pushing the conversation at schools around the country and the world on how current MBAs that are graduating can really influence, be equipped to influence the way the companies they're entering address sustainability and the climate crisis. Doug, you had mentioned solar and wind, and I remembered seeing an article that last week, I think wind surpassed coal and nuclear energy production in the U.S. for the first time in history. So we are getting there. We are seeing these renewable energy sources rise and become the legitimate alternative to the status quo.
That's awesome.
So we're coming to the end of our time here. Any last minute things that either of you want to share that you think are relevant and important tips that, Doug, as you're finishing your program, what do you wish you had known when you started? And then we'll go to Connor.
I think there's a pressure when you're coming into business school, and I definitely felt this the summer before I started Foster, that you need to have everything figured out. And if you have it figured out, that's awesome, but you might not. You probably don't. But having an idea, a direction, goes a long way to helping you figure it out. And so I had this inkling, right, that I wanted my career to be more sustainability focused. I wasn't sure what that looked like, but I wrote my essays about it. And so that drove me to Net Impact. That drove me to like-minded students in my class, in the class ahead of me. And so it's all about that incremental progress. And then it eventually led me to ClimateCap, which frankly was one of the most formative experiences that I had here at Foster. It was also one of the most fun. And so I think I would recommend that, listeners and incoming first years and subsequent classes really just look for that incremental progress in whatever direction they're trying to make. Hopefully sustainability, that's great. And the road will sort of reveal itself as you go, and you will meet all of the right people. After, on a second year specific note, after you sort of lock down the job, don't be afraid to keep networking and keep talking to people, because I think there's this idea that mission accomplished, I don't have to do that anymore. But really the end of the MBA is really the beginning of your career. And so what you can do before you start to really jumpstart, so you hit the ground running, is really important. And that's something I've been trying to work on and definitely could improve on, but something that I hope other students do as well.
And Connor, what do you wish you'd known a couple months ago when you started the program that you know now?
Yeah, I think I kind of echo what Doug said, is like, it's okay to not have everything figured out on day one of your MBA program. The other thing that I actually think I benefited from was I would advise incoming first years to find your people, find like-minded people. And that goes for whatever career path you're interested in. But specifically, if you're interested in sustainability careers, find your people, build that network, and work together as a collective group, and then expand it. Find the people in your community next to you. And I highly encourage everybody who can to attend ClimateCap, because that's like the ultimate culmination of quote unquote your people. But also, if you can't, or if there are opportunities to do more local or regional events, take every advantage of those. They're oftentimes cheaper, less travel time, but still expanding that network and leverage that, lean on that, because I have found that, especially within the sustainability space, everybody wants to help everybody else. And students should be taking every advantage of that.
I think great advice from both of you. And on that note, Connor, there can be a tendency once you come to business school to think it's what's between these four walls. But I think with every industry and with the way the job market is now and the way business networking and professional networking can expand your opportunities, it's really important to get out of the halls of PACCAR and Dempsey and soon Founders, right? And get out there into the community to connect with people who are doing this work and who can be references and referrals and mentors and guides as you are crafting your career in sustainability. I want to thank you both for your time today. I think you provided some great insights into how to make the most of the ClimateCap conference and how you both have approached your career search as you work your way into sustainability in business. So thank you for joining me on Conversations on Careers and Professional Life.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Gregory. It was a blast.
Connor and Doug shared so much great advice in this episode, but the thing I want to underscore the most is the importance of networking, both within the program, as Connor said, find your people, and as Doug said, even after you've secured your internship or job, it's still a great time to network. The economy has changed a lot since we recorded this episode a year ago, and having a strong professional network is critically important to personal and professional resilience, especially in times of economic uncertainty. As always, visit conversationsoncareers.com for episode show notes with links to many of the resources discussed on this episode. And if you're interested in this topic, check out conversationsoncareers.com/impact for other episodes with guests working in sustainability. Thank you for listening to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or classmate. Help others find the show by leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Conversations on Careers and Professional Life is produced by me, Gregory Heller, with support from the Foster School of Business, Office of MBA Career Management. Learn more about the show, find show notes and past episodes, and get in touch with me at conversationsoncareers.com.